Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the VBS4 Technology Conferences. Hopefully, you would have seen day 1. If you haven't, don't worry, day 1 is available on YouTube, as will day 2 be later on this afternoon or this evening. So don't worry if you miss anything, it will be made available for you. I'll be joined later on by Earl, who will be talking about terrain and VBS Geo editing specifically. But let's move on. We've got a lot to talk about, a lot of cool new things and features that will be coming along in VBS 21.1. That is the first big piece of news. VBS4 21.1 has been released. So it's now available to download. If you have a commercial license of VBS4, it will be available on License Manager for all of our users. It's the first version of VBS4 which is ready for training. So this is the version that's designed to replace VBS3 in its entirety. So if you have VBS3 training scenarios set up right now, you can load up VBS4 and load up those same training scenarios and achieve the same goals and an awful lot more. So VBS4 obviously has improved dramatically on VBS3 for a lot of use cases, and we're continuing to improve, as you'll see in this presentation. One of the first huge improvements is the new workflows. So if you're familiar with VBS3 workflows, they were extremely adaptable, and that led to a lot of the popularity of VBS3. But if you also used VBS4 20.1, you'll notice that 20.1 had a relatively limited workflow. You were somewhat constrained in what you could do. There have been a huge amount of improvements to that workflow. Firstly, we've brought back single-player battle spaces in VBS3 that would be called training missions. So we now have a concept of the administrator view and the trainee view. That didn't exist previously in 20.1, but it now returns in VBS4 and much improved over what was capable in VBS3. You also now, because you have the ability to use the VWS as your centralized storage for scenarios, as an administrator, you can take a mission, a single player mission, and publish it to the VWS and make it available to all of your trainees with a single button press. A lot of these workflow improvements have been designed from the ground up to minimize any manual file copying. As long as you have that VWS, which, although it's called the world server, that server can be local to you. You don't need the internet. It can be in your own training battle space, in your training room, sorry. And that server can serve these files to all of your clients with the minimum amount of effort. I'm going to jump very quickly to a video which will describe some of these changes. You will hear Pete's voice and not mine, who will talk you through some of the improvements. What's also important to note is in the original 20.1 release, the dedicated server was automatically started up for you, and that's very helpful on the VWS. If for these workflow improvements, you're now able to start a dedicated server on any machine, any simulation client on any machine, even AAR clients on any machine, and they will all work as they used to in VBS3 with some major improvements. Like if you have an AAR client or simulation client running on your network, you don't have to manually copy the AAR backwards and forwards. The system will copy the AAR files to the administrator machine for you to play at your leisure. So if I just stop these slides quickly and switch over to a video on the workflows, we'll quickly hear Pete's voice.
Is the addition of single-player training missions, and you'll see those here once you create them. Creating them is very easy. When you create a new battle space, and we'll just give it a random name, Battle Space 2, you'll see this option for Available as a Single-Player Training Mission. If we select that and save changes, we'll see that Battle Space 2 is available here in the Battle Spaces list, and also here as a single-player mission. Once we add units to that, we'll be able to execute. We'll quickly add a playable unit now to the battle space by using the editor. I'm just going to add a single playable unit in this scenario, and I'm going to close and save so we can actually host the mission here as an administrator, or we can go to training and execute this mission as a player. What we're going to do now is close down VBS4, restart as a trainee, and have a look at what that looks like. To start VBS4 as a trainee, all you need to do is unselect admin in the launcher, and we'll go ahead now and launch VBS4 once again. VBS4 has now loaded, and you can see that we're still connected to the VBS World server, but all the user can see is the training tab. We don't have administrator privileges. From here, we can go ahead and execute the single player training mission. For example, if this was a training mission showing the user how to use VBS4, this is where you would put it. So we can click on execute, and after a few seconds you can see that we're in the middle of this desert in this single player training scenario. We'll exit out of this for now, and you can also see that we can connect to a server from here as well. This means that a trainee can connect to the dedicated server on the VBS World server if needed, and of course we can upload single player battle spaces like Battlespace 2 here to the World server as well. You do that by clicking on the same icon, then you acknowledge the upload, and after a few seconds the battle space will upload to the World server. If we actually switch over to the World server PC, we can see that it's been uploaded, and it's now possible to see that battle space on all trainee stations. Over here on the right, we have a second client PC where we're going to load up VBS4 as a trainee, and we'll be able to see that battle space in the list. Let's do that now. VBS4 is loaded here on the right in trainee mode, and as you can see, we don't see the battle space tab like we do over here when we're the administrator, and the trainee computer here will automatically download the battle space the first time you click on execute. The scenario will start immediately, and here we are in the middle of the desert. That's a basic overview of how we can use the VBS World server and the new workflow to create and distribute single player training scenarios. Now we're going to have a look at different network architectures that are possible with VBS4 21.1. The first two will be offline network architectures, which means that there's no VBS World server in the loop. These are the same as the ways that you can network VBS3. The second three are online network architectures. Online means that we're connected to a VBS World server. That brings us to the end of this tutorial video. Of course, there is a ton more information in the VBS4 documentation on VBS4 deployment options, and don't hesitate to contact us at support@bisimulations.com if you have any questions. Thank you.
Very quick introduction to the workflow improvements. There is a new tutorial being uploaded to our YouTube channel at the moment, which is a much more in-depth view of these workflow changes. It's definitely worth watching if you have the time to go over it. It really does make it much clearer as to the improvements and what it does for you. So now we're going to move on to some of these scenario generation improvements. So this is what we would refer to as the prepare phase. So these are the tools that you would use to prepare terrain edits and some of your mission creation. We've added some new orbats to the plan tool. We are planning a orbat editor as well. So rather than having these static orbats, there will be an editor built into plan and allow you to build your own custom orbats, whether it be your own country's orbats or theoretical enemy orbats. That's coming into 2022. We have now integrated a simplistic version of the FTC into plan itself, so you can coordinate fire missions as part of your plan. So if you wanted to do screening or anything else, or a normal fires engagement, you can do that and schedule it as part of the plan timeline, and we'll see that in a little bit. There's been a lot of changes to the editor. It's been reskinned and improved, but a lot of the editor has remained as it was in VBS3, but just tweaked to make it generally better, with the idea being the minimal training required to get people up to speed again. There has also been a load of geo improvements. I'm not going to go into them in too much detail here or in the video, as Earl's going to be covering that later on. So what I'm going to do now is just go to a quick video which will highlight some of these prepare changes. So this video was recorded by Pete. He's going to zoom on down into Fort Hood. You can see that Fort Hood has already had some satellite data inset into it. And if you're not aware of how that process works, it is part of our other technology conferences. You can see how to insert your own satellite imagery. Pete's creating a battle space. So the battle space, it becomes the container for all of these changes. So your terrain changes and your plans. And here we are. So we're now in Fort Hood. Pete's looking at a nice defensive position where he wants to create a enemy outpost for for this training mission. This mission is not going to be particularly tactically sound, and I think Pete would admit that as well. So what he's doing is very simply using the Geo line tool. So we're in the Geo mode at the moment. You'll notice that at the top of the screen, you can see the Geo tab. You can switch between Geo, plan, and editor at any point. In Geo, he's created a trench using the line tool. He's now going to use the object placement tool to place some defensive structures. You can see the terrain automatically conforming to those structures as well to minimize the amount of manual effort you require to make it look right. Having done that, Pete's going to then create some tank ditches, I believe. And again, this is just demonstrating the very simplistic start of how you can use Geo. Earl will go into a lot more detail about some of the really cool stuff you can do with Geo and some of the impressive results you can get with it. But you can see here, it doesn't require any hugely complex interface. It's designed to be used by almost anyone. The first time they pick up the software, they should be able to make some terrain edits. So he's created some very simple tank ditches there for his defensive position. He's also now going to use the Geo Surface tool to modify the surface and add some trees. So very quickly going to select trees and create it instantly in the terrain. So all of these trees are selected from the biome he is operating within, i.e. if you create a forested area, the trees will automatically be matching the sort of trees that you should find in that part of the world. Very quickly now, he's going to place some roads, or in this case, some earth tracks. These are not just visual elements, these are also recognized by AI. So by adding these tracks, you're also telling the AI, which do not have the data from the satellite imagery, that this is a passable road, and if they're going to use a convoy, that they can use that element. Pete's just checking the sightlines, seeing what it's going to look like. And he's now switched over to plan. You see there's no big loading or any huge change in process. It's all built into VBS4 and it's instantaneous. Very quickly, Pete's selecting some elements from the orbats. These at the moment are just being placed as purely icons. We're using the 2525C symbology library. Pete's going to give them some very simplistic orders as well. Again, tactically not particularly sound, putting an armored division, an armored platoon attacking straight onto a hill. He's also placed in some mechanized infantry with a move and an assault. So he's now zoomed into the timeline down at the bottom. You can see the schedule of the maneuvers. Very quickly going to put in a phase line as well, which can be used for synchronization. You can see changing the phase line time, which is adjusting the timing at the bottom of the screen. You can scrub through that timeline as well, which will give you a prediction or a forecast of where the elements will get to. This helps with synchronization before you even build the mission. And now he clicks build mission. What build mission does is it actually places the AI entities, so the 3D models, all of the elements within those 3D models as well. So each tank has a gunner and a commander and a driver, etc. They have also had their control AI waypoints created. So you can see the red text there in the background, which is actually the control AI waypoints. Pete's then switched straight into the VBS editor. So this is as it was in VBS3. He's very quickly placing down some enemy BMPs up on top of this hill to act as a target for his plan. And he's going to place some camo nets over the top to make it look slightly more realistic. And again, there was no loading time between switching between plan and editor, and you can obviously switch backwards and forwards in any direction you like between all of these tools. So that now that he's vaguely happy with his plan, he's going to add in some artillery support. So this is the FTC integration element. So adding in some artillery here. And he's going to add in a mortar platoon as well. Now, each of these artillery elements can be given individual targets and can be individually scheduled, as you would expect. And under the hood, they are using the same FTC module that is available in the VBS editor. So he creates a TRP. He's going to assign a mission to the first artillery unit. It's the M777s. And again, you can see down at the bottom of the schedule, he is now just picking up the fire mission and setting the timing for it. He can set time on target, or he can set an amount of ammunition to be used as you can in the FTC. In this case, he's done an HE barrage initially on the enemy target, which seems like a good idea. And then he's also putting in a smoke mission, which follows up later on. And again, probably should have come first, but I'm not going to criticize his tactics too much. So you can see we're now at mission runtime. So the mission has kicked off. You can see the mechanized infantry, the units shaking out and getting into their vehicles. The M1s are starting their move already. The AI is full fidelity control AI, so you can see that they are navigating around trees. And you can also see the problem with Pete's plan. They are being engaged almost instantly as they come around the corner of that hill. But you can see that they are navigating under fire, avoiding trees, and successfully getting through the forest as they begin firing on the target. So I think this is just going to play on a little bit here as we're following the M1s. And here we are at the artillery. You can see the timeline down at the bottom is approaching the fire mission, which means the fire mission is about to fire. In the distance, you can see the icons for the rest of the elements, and you can see what the AI is doing as well. So not only that they are moving, but they're observing or what stage they are at, which helps you to understand the position that they're currently in. And here we can see the HE coming in, destroying the target and the majority of the enemy in there. But Pete also had a new fire mission. So there's a new fire mission that's still going to be coming in, and this is the smoke rounds that we're expecting to see. Just as that is about to come in, we have our mechanized infantry who are beginning to move up to their assault points. When they get to their assault point, the entities within the vehicles will dismount and begin the assault towards the target. And there we can see the smoke rounds landing. And again, you have these notifications as to what the AI are doing. Here we have the dismounts coming out of the vehicle, taking up a defensive position before forming up into their assault formation. And you can see that the all-bat is configured so we have the right number of machine gunners, the right number of anti-tank gunners, etc. For this particular all-bat. These all-bats can be customized manually at the moment, but as I said, there is a full all-bat editor planned for 2022. And the vehicles will move on to a highly successful mission. As you can see, the real-time deformation of the terrain from the artillery and a very, very destroyed target area. So I'm going to leave that there, and I will switch back to the slides. So just some of the improvements there. As I said, Earl's going to go into a lot more detail on Geo rather later on in this presentation. So some really exciting news in this release of VBS4. So this is available in VBS4 21.1. It is available as part of the VBS bundle. So the VBS bundle is a license which contains the Microsoft Bing data, Radio Pro, and also some of the original Chalkboard Pro features that were available originally. So the ability to share things like your mission layers amongst a multiplayer scenario. The Bing data, it should be noted, is activated by a Microsoft Bing license key. So you also need to have access to Microsoft Bing data API. It's actually very easy to do, very, very simple. But it should be noted that everything that we show here is being streamed directly from Microsoft's servers. So what I'm going to do now is go to a quick video and I will talk through it a little bit, hopefully. Or actually, I think Pete will.
Includes the ability to stream in Bing Maps data and render this on the terrain instead of terrain data from the underlying base globe or from the VBS World server. Now, to get a Bing API key, you'll need to use your web browser. You can just search for Create a Bing Maps key and it'll take you to this page. Once you have your account, log in as a developer. Next, you'll go to My Keys, and this will allow you to copy your API key to the clipboard. You can then paste this directly into the VBS4 launcher under Bing Maps data. Now, it's very important to note that if you've entered a valid Bing key, then it's the Bing Maps data that will be rendered on the terrain instead of the VBS4 base globe data or terrain from the VBS World server. You can, however, still use the VBS World server as a way to store and access your battle spaces. Now that I've entered a valid API key, we can go ahead and launch VBS4. Once VBS4 is started, you'll see that the terrain has been textured with data directly from the Microsoft Bing servers. We'll zoom in now to my hometown in Australia, just by way of example. Now keep in mind that every time you use VBS4 or go to a new location, the Microsoft Bing data will be re-downloaded. That's in accordance with the Microsoft Terms of Service. And I would also note that there are terms of service that relate to you, the user, that you should be familiar with before using this data. So here you can see that we have a very high resolution imagery of Coffs Harbour texturing the terrain, being streamed directly from the Microsoft servers. In addition to this high resolution 2D texture, VBS4 also supports 3D cities from Microsoft Bing. So if we go to Rome, for example, we'll see here the 3D rendering directly from Microsoft being shown in VBS4. It can take a few seconds to load because it needs to stream the data from the Microsoft servers. Now, if you're wondering what 3D cities are included, you can use the Microsoft Maps app within Windows 10. It looks like this, and it actually gives you, under this menu, a list of all the 3D cities that Microsoft Bing includes, and all of these cities will be rendered in 3D within VBS4. So for example, if we go to Austin, Texas within VBS4, we'll just do a search for it up here, and now we can see Austin rendered in 3D within VBS4. Here's an example of what we can do with this data. We're in Austin and we're looking at the state capital, and as you can see, we've just placed down a civilian pattern of life editor object. We can use this data effectively out of the box. One thing that we're doing here that's not immediately obvious is that we're actually showing extruded buildings underneath the 3D Bing data, which is enabling the AI to path planned around this building to some extent. It's important to note that the 3D data on its own won't have any collision geometry in the current version of VBS4, but we're looking to fix that in the future. But as you can see on the screen here, out of the box you can do some really nice scenarios with no terrain development whatsoever. This is data that just streams in directly from Microsoft Bing.
So I'm quickly just going to open up the presentation again. So hopefully you agree that's some very cool technology. It should be noted that obviously you will need a internet connection to use the Bing data. You are streaming it directly off Microsoft servers. It's awesome that Microsoft have given us the ability to stream this data, and we really hope it's going to be useful for you. It should be noted again, as Pete was saying in there, that the buildings themselves have no collisions, but we have got automatically extruded buildings underneath them, which allows the AI to do some path planning around them. But we do recommend that you have a go with it and have a play, because it is very, very cool. We've also made some huge improvements to environmental rendering. I'm actually just going to switch straight to video, I think, and talk you through it as it shows up, if I can find the correct video. So firstly is imposter tech. In VBS4 20.1, you would have noticed that we still had billboard trees. Billboard trees were sort of 2D planes that would turn to face you and looked pretty bad from the sky. Now we have this new imposter technology. So every tree you see is 3D. It takes up real 3D volume. From every angle, they are correct and 3D as you would expect them to be. And it allows us to still show the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of trees. We also now have, for lack of a better word, puddle tech. So VBS already has a very complex surface moisture simulation. As precipitation increases, over time, the surface moisture will increase. But now visually, you'll be able to see this. Puddles will grow in size and become more obvious. And equally, if the rain stops during your scenario and it's a hot day, the rain will evaporate over time and the puddles will reduce. Obviously, it's done real time, so it takes some time, but it adds a huge visual improvement. It also is simulated, so it's not purely just a visual improvement. It also improves, or it also indicates when vehicles will be slipping around a bit more due to that surface moisture. We also have some new snow coverage tech as well, so you can now put in partial snow coverage on any terrain area. And it can be mixed with the puddle tech, so you can create wet snow or dry snow situations. We've also made some really large maritime improvements. Again, I'm just going to play the video for you and talk over it. So firstly, we now have ship wakes. You can see these are some ships being viewed from a very long distance away. And importantly, you can see the wakes from a long distance away as well. The sea state is being changed at runtime here. So sea states have been improved massively. They are affected by the wind, and you can set the scale in Beaufort scale. So the waves are correct to the real life scale. There is still some improvements to be done on particle effects here, but you can see that the physics is beginning to react correctly, and that will continue to be improved over time. But I think you'll agree that the water improvements themselves are really quite impressive. Then the wakes. So the wakes are primarily created so that, as in real life, you can identify ship movements from a long distance away. In poor weather situations, the aircraft can locate ships by tracking the wake from a long way away. So on to another exciting new piece of technology. So this is ViewPorts. So ViewPorts are best thought of as additional camera views that can be used in VBS4, and they can be used in two ways. They essentially provide a lightweight multi-view or multi-channel capability for a single VBS4 instance. And you can use them either in a picture-in-picture mode or in a viewport window mode. So viewport windows are, as the name suggests, separate windows, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Whereas picture-in-picture is equivalent to the render-to-texture technology that was available in VBS3, but is far more powerful now and easier to configure. New viewport windows are a licensed feature. So for every new viewport window, there is a license required. But for picture-in-picture in a standard VBS4 window, that is freely available to everyone. There are obviously some limitations to this technology. Each of these viewports are essentially stealing performance from your central VBS4 client. So every new viewport that you create is a new rendering window and therefore is consuming rendering capability from that VBS4 instance. It also is not suitable for your more complex multi-view deployments. Still, that is where VBS Blue IG comes into play, where you can have as many channels as you like without degrading the performance of each channel. One of the good use cases, which I think we'll move to the next slide here. So one of the use cases for viewports, if we look at the picture-in-picture mode there, something like a local situational awareness camera view. You just want a very small view of your situational awareness in a vehicle. You could very quickly create that using the picture-in-picture mode. Whereas the viewport windows, which are displayed on the bottom here, that's going to be more useful if you have a 3-screen setup, for instance, and you wanted to have 2 screens act as rear view mirrors on a vehicle. So a desktop plus training system. It's not a full complex simulator. It's a very simplistic 3-screen monitor. We wouldn't recommend doing more than 2 viewport channels at any one time. As I said, each channel does degrade performance of VBS4. But if you have any questions about performance or how it needs to work, please contact us and we will help guide you between the two technologies, between VBS Blue IG and viewport technology. I quickly show a video of it working in practice. So this first demonstration is just going to show the picture-in-picture. As you can see, there are editor objects. You simply link those editor objects to the your vehicle or entity. You can configure the type of camera, the orientation of the camera. Should it be working in third person, first person? Where is it attached to the model? You can see here we have two very simple views to the left and right of the screen, which are showing the left and right of the helicopter as the helicopter flies around. The second example here is shot on a widescreen monitor. So we have VBS in the middle here in a single window, and we have configured the viewports to render to two separate windows. And we can we can configure the size of the windows and the position of those windows. But essentially, we repeated the first demonstration, but instead of using a picture-in-picture, we now have two separate views linked to VBS4 showing different angles. We can also show different visual modes as well. So each of the viewports can be configured as DayTV or TI or NVG or any of the other sensor modes that we currently support. As I said, if you have any questions on this, we're more than happy to take you through it, but I hope you agree it's going to be a very useful piece of technology for you. PhysX 4 upgrade. So PhysX 4 is the sort of not quite latest and greatest, but it is the latest generation of physics module that have been integrated into VBS4, which has allowed us to improve our physics simulation hugely. The physics upgrade has happened automatically, so every single vehicle in VBS4 now is taking advantage of PhysX 4. Most notably, you'll notice that vehicles no longer slide or have strange friction coefficients. For instance, in VBS3, you might notice that some of the vehicles at high speed spin out very easily, lose traction very easily, and look like they're driving on ice occasionally. More importantly, though, this upgrade has allowed us to make sure that the physics module is entirely modular and will allow us to increase or improve physics in the future as new physics engines come out. So I'm just going to get a quick physics video to demonstrate this. So the first example here, we see a support vehicle. This is, in this case, towing a jackal, which isn't a great advertisement for the jackal. But you can see here that the vehicle suspension is reacting correctly. It's on a rigid tow bar. The front wheels are spinning under inertia. The rear wheels are spinning due to friction with the terrain. And it's articulating on the joint correctly as it goes around corners. In this example, you can really see the suspension articulation as we go over some rough terrain here with each set of wheels acting differently depending on the height of the terrain. And we see some strikers doing some nice jumps, and you can see here the simulation of the impact and the weight on the suspension. We can see a vehicle with low friction, so this vehicle's actually been modified so that it's demonstrating like the worst case situation on snow. But you can even see here the diff locking, or not locking in this case, on this vehicle, so you have one wheel spinning as it tries to gain traction. PhysX 4 also allows us to improve the rope physics quite dramatically. So you can see here one of our developers is essentially playing with the physics system, has added a load to the front of this crane without putting the stabilizers down, so you can see the vehicle juddering around, and he's a pretty terrible crane driver. He's then dynamically increasing the weight at the end of the rope. So you see they switched from 40,000 kilograms to 1,000 kilograms since it's sort of rubber banded up there. But you can see that the behavior is much more realistic compared to how it was in VBS3, and that's just due to the better performance of the PhysX 4 module. And again, here you can see he's testing the extremes of rope physics and trying to curl the rope around the jib of the crane. And again, this is all due to the improved PhysX 4 engine. One of the key things that it's also given us is improved performance. We now support far more physics-based vehicles in a scene with much less degradation in performance than you would expect in VBS3 or even VBS4 with the previous PhysX module. There is no video of this one, unfortunately, but this is a nice visual improvement. So now you get a really nice halo effect around lights in foggy conditions. So as you would in real life, you get a kind of really realistic view. You can see on the right here, as the visibility drops down, the differing effect it has on the light and the halo effect it creates in front of the user. There's also been some terrain inset improvements. These terrain insets have new lighting and new runways. Again, just general improvements to the quality of some of the included insets in VBS4. As always, with every release we do, we tend to add new content. There is a bunch of new content here. I am going to play a very quick video, which is going to go through some of it, but not all of it. So lots of new land vehicles, quite a lot of new British stuff, and a lot of new near-peer enemy, and importantly, sort of EW assets and target assets. Lots of new aircraft. Again, you'll see a varying quality of whether they are meant to be fully interactable or whether they are intended to be targets, essentially. So Learjets, for instance, not done to a huge quality, but match the real vehicle extremely well. And lots of new maritime assets as well. So really expanding the capability or the model content library, allowing you to simulate everything that's out there in the real world. So at this point, I'm going to call on Earl, who's then going to talk to you about terrain editing and specifically about VBS Geo.
Hey guys, just confirm you can hear me, Ollie?
Yep, all good.
Great. Okay, so this is just a quick recap for those of you that joined yesterday and saw my demonstration. What I showed was the ability to use TerraTools in an automated setup using some of our world server technology. And what we did was build a little bit of terrain in Africa. And what we're going to be doing today is jumping in more detail. We sort of skipped over VBS Geo yesterday just due to time constraints. And today we're going to focus more on the VBS Geo editing. So just to put things in context quickly, VBS4 comes with VBS Geo and the VBS World Server. And VBS Geo is this really simple terrain editing mode directly inside VBS4 where you can jump right into the terrain in a 3D view and just start editing terrain. You saw Pete's video doing a little bit of that previously. And the VBS World Server is optional. If you're connected to the World Server, when you save your geo terrain, it gets placed there. And you're inside of what we call a battle space, and that battle space becomes available to anyone else who connects to the VBS World Server. And then TerraTools is sold separately, and the function of TerraTools is to build correlated terrain for a whole range of runtime systems, over 15 different runtimes or simulation systems. And we support a whole range of GIS formats, just dozens and dozens of GIS formats as import formats. So where we're starting off today is with a piece of terrain that has been built by TerraTools, and we're going to jump into that with Geo and just take a look at some of the new features in VBS Geo as it is in VBS4 21.1, the latest release. All right, here we go. So here we are inside VBS4, and we're currently actually in the editor mode, and we're going to get down close to our terrain area. I'm already switching over to the Geo mode. So these three modes of Geo, Plan, and Editor during this prepare stage, you can kind of flip between them as needed to do the different kinds of terrain editing, mission planning, and I guess more detailed mission editing. So we're in this terrain I built in the demo yesterday in Palma, Mozambique, and we're going to jump down to ground level here and just do some hand placement of some specific buildings. But before we start that, what I'm going to do, it's actually happening off screen here. I'm just removing the satellite imagery from the server, and it's going to actually live update, and it's going to pull the satellite imagery out. What we're going to do is actually a bit of a fictional setup. We're going to build a little marketplace, and for that, we don't actually need the satellite imagery. I just want to be able to show some of the surface editing in more detail. Okay, so first, again, I've talked about this yesterday, but you can see all this detailed vegetation here. This is coming in as part of the VBS4 biome system, so it's all pre-configured forests and bushes and grasses and different surfaces. All we're doing is kind of giving the engine instructions on where to place that. But now coming over to the building editing, I'm going to use the eraser tool. And you can see with a single click, we can erase that building from the terrain, even though it was actually a terrain inset generated by TerraTools. So we've sort of removed that terrain now, or that building from our terrain, and we're going to start placing some buildings. I just did a search there. If the text is too small to see, I just typed Africa in the building search menu. And you can see I'm just selecting some different buildings that look like they might be a good fit for what I'm trying to build. And I'm just selecting some of the prefabricated buildings from the VBS library that have kind of a little bit of a commercial or kind of retail look for this area. Okay, so I've added these 4 buildings now, and I'm just kind of taking a look at if it's kind of going to suit the needs I'm trying to get to. And it's looking pretty good, but there's a few, you can see that there's the remnants of a road here on the right. And so I'm going into the surface editing now, and I'm going to go through the options of different kinds of surfaces that I can paint with this paintbrush tool. And I've selected packed soil, and I'm just changing the size of my brush. And I'm just thinking about if it looks good here to just sort of paint some almost like a parking lot type surface in front of these buildings. It's kind of a pretty bright sand. And that's, one of the great things about Geo is the ability to very quickly try this stuff. And if it doesn't look quite right, you can revert it very easily, or even just, paint over it again. So we're sort of going through this process of trying to find what's going to look right for the scene I'm trying to build. And at this point I realize it's probably not the surface that I want to use. So I go back to the barren area surface, which has this darker brown soil that looks better in this location. And I'm actually just going to paint over what I've done here and kind of reset it back. So coming from a TerraTools background where things are, large scale, but, automated, I find that Geo pairs really well with that type of development. So we've built this terrain in TerraTools quickly. But then we can come into Geo and do some editing to kind of test what looks good together. So if I found that other surface actually looked better, and because I built this terrain previously in TerraTools, I could either stay in Geo and do further editing, or I could take that information back to TerraTools and make some changes there and then do kind of a large scale change to say, let's change all of those surfaces to use this new type instead. Okay, so I think we're done with the sort of building and surface editing here. And now we're going to switch to one of the new modeling tools. This was introduced already in the current version of VBS4 that's out there, 20.1.2, I think. But I'm selecting the linear placement tool. So this is placing objects basically in a linear fashion, sort of connected line. So we're just drawing a line on the ground, and that fence object from the prefab settings is just going to place this wooden fence for me really quickly. So you can see I'm just clicking the points of the line, and the fence is following along with it. Okay, so we have our little kind of market area started here now. And we're going to start now taking a look at just adding some additional details in front of the buildings to kind of make it a little bit more interesting and sort of busy. So we go back to our object placement, point-based placement, and we're going to search. I'm using the term market, and it's showing me all the different objects in the VBS library that have the term market in the file name. In this case, we have some market sort of fruit vendor tables. We're just going to stick a few of those in front of the building. And then we're going to test this awning here. It's pretty large, and actually it's a bit higher than the building, so I'm going to go back and select a different one. I didn't show it here, but there's actually a bunch of options for scaling objects. So if I wanted to fit that, I could actually scale it down, either just in one axis or at all axes. I could even just sink it into the ground if I wanted. So there's a lot of options for how you want to place stuff. And you get a lot of control if you need it here in Geo, but it's if you're just trying to take a simple approach, it's pretty quick to do. So now I've gone to the selection of tables, and I'm just placing a few of those out front. There's just, there's all sorts of things. There's, barrels, everything you could pretty much want to build a scene like this is here. And just before we wrap up, I'm going to place some sort of piles of building materials along the fences just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So in this case, there's this large pile of sort of concrete and building materials. We're just going to place it here, which will block AI and create an actual impediment to AI that tries to move through the area, if it has some tactical significance to have these things around, and then a similar kind of obstacle here being placed just along the fence. Okay, so now we're just going to kind of take a look and see if it's fitting where I want to leave it, and it does look pretty good. One thing worth noting at this point, so we're actually editing a terrain that was initially built by TerraTools. That doesn't have to be the case, as what Pete was showing previously was adding changes to the base terrain in VBS4 right from out of the box. You can open up VBS4 and start editing the terrain. But one of the nice things that this gives us an opportunity. The fact that it started off as a TerraTools terrain means we could actually take these edits that we're doing and export them back to TerraTools, or rather TerraTools can import the battle space that contains these geo edits. So if we wanted to have those buildings baked back into our TerraTools terrain, we could do that. It's an option for you TerraTools users out there. And the benefits of that, of course, is it makes a simpler package to deliver to someone if you're shipping this off to other users. Okay, so now actually we're going to take a look at some other editing features. We're going to move from the town of Palma, and we're going to move out to the, well, first we're bringing the imagery back in, and we're going to move out to the natural gas development. I talked about this a bit yesterday. There's been massive development in the area just in the last year, and one of the interesting things here is that they've begun to build a port area. So they've been pushing a bunch of dirt out into the ocean and creating these little peninsulas. We can't see them too well here, so I've jumped into the editor, and I'm going to use a script command actually to set watercolor. So I'm kind of overriding the ocean watercolor to make it very, very transparent just for this editing task. And you can see all the development that's happened. So the current coastline is based on the best available OpenStreetMap data that's out in the public, and it reflects the original coastline before this development happened. So our system is doing what we've asked it to, which is to take OSM data and place the ocean water, the coastline where OpenStreetMap says it is. In this case, it's a little bit outdated and they don't reflect this change yet. We are going to continue improving our base globe. So somewhere in the future, if those changes are reflected in OpenStreetMap, we will have that update in a future version of VBS4 and the world server data. But what I'm doing now actually is just using the the elevation editing tool. I'm using the area-based tool, and I'm just tracing out this area that I want to raise up above the waterline, and you'll see me do that in just a second. And one other little detail here is if I was just to raise this up now without making other changes, we might get a very steep slope, which isn't maybe incorrect for the area, but I'm going to change the transition distance, which is a little bit hard to see, but there's the primary line, or the primary polygon that I'm drawing has a green line, and then there's a little blue line on the outside of it. And you'll see I'll increase this number from 5 to 15, and that space gets larger. So we're actually changing the terrain over a smoother distance so it doesn't have such a sharp cliff. And I'm just doing a direct kind of elevation override. So there's some options there to use minimum, average, or maximum value of all the elevation points inside my polygon, but instead I'm just going to override and set one flat value. And you can see that pops it up above the waterline, and we have a nice representation of exactly what I see in my imagery. And we'll do the same thing over here on this side. Okay, so we're just about done the second section, and we'll do the same thing and lift it up above the waterline, and then we'll have our port started here. Just take a look at that now. So I've just done this very quickly, and you'll see it's, we have some land here now. So already, I could move into a mission editing mode, and our AI would be able to travel out on that terrain. But now I'm going to switch to some object placement. So you can see all the different, trucks and facilities and things. I could start placing all of that stuff. In this case, we're going to switch to an example of one of the new tools. And I found, I think, a kind of unique way to make use of it. So there's this line of containers here. What I'm going to do is start with the eraser to remove some buildings that are placed on this location. And we'll switch to the linear placement tool, or the line placement tool. And I'm going to switch to, or I'm going to select the option to create my own line style. And so I get this entire model library again, and I can put any model I want into this linear placement tool. And what I'll do is select these containers, just a kind of random mix of shipping containers, 4 of them. We hit OK, and then I can start drawing, and you'll see, already I have this kind of linear placement working. I can just start placing this if I wanted to. And actually, there are parts of the site that do use containers placed in this way, so that might be a valid tool that I could save into Geo. But instead, I want to have them flipped 90 degrees and fitting the imagery that I see. So I'm going to start by just selecting each and setting their rotation. I don't think this was the intended use of this tool when it was first designed. It's mostly for fences, but you can see it's actually quite handy for these kinds of stacked objects. Any sort of object that's placed next to it, another one, you can make use of this tool. And you can see we're not quite wide enough. So these are short containers. It actually looks like these are 40-foot shipping containers. So we probably do have models for those. Instead of me searching for them, I'm just going to do a quick fix here to show the scaling tool. And so we're going to scale each of these to be a little bit longer in the x-axis to fill up that space of what looks like a 40-foot shipping container. And I just have to apply that value to each of these as I go along. Okay, and then that should take care of it. So now I have this linear placement tool that's placing shipping containers, because there's a number of sites around this development where this type of object is placed, and it's not that easy to, you wouldn't want to have to place every single object manually, so this saves a lot of time. Okay, I've now saved that style, and you can see, if you can see on the icon there, there's a little green icon that denotes it being a custom edited linear style. And if I wanted to, I can actually send that style to another person who's using Geo. They can actually add it to their version of VBS4 so they can use it themselves in Geo. So here's an example where I can just very quickly place that type of container. And of course, you can see how fast that is. And this is a very regular pattern. It's very, maybe it's a little bit too perfect. I could add a little bit of spacing and a little bit of randomization of rotation and positions if I wanted to make it look a little bit more natural. So that's just a quick demo of that linear placement tool, but specifically the custom editing option. And now we're going to take a look at these kind of holding ponds here, where there's actually supposed to be water from what it looks like in the satellite imagery. I'm going to switch back to the surface editing tool, and I'm going to change the surface to the wetlands surface type. And I'm going to use the area tool to do that quickly. Okay, so now we can just start tracing a polygon, and we're just trying to kind of stamp out these trees so we can see the water that's underneath. And you can see it actually didn't remove the trees in this case. So this type of wetland, the way it's configured, is sort of for a swampy forest swamp, I guess. So I'm going to just simply change, without even drawing the polygon again, I'm going to change the surface type and choose muddy soil instead. And you can see that knocks out the trees the way I wanted it to. And now we can see the sort of irregular shape of the pond area here. So I'm just going to trace that out fairly quickly. I'm following somewhat accurately to the satellite imagery. We're working with some relatively high resolution 50 centimeter imagery, so we can see this really well. And you can see once I have that set, I just hit enter, and it's going to automatically cut in the water for me. And we'll do the same. So you can see here, it's already has water in it, and we'll do the same for the smaller pond. And we'll have that little bit of bridge in between there. And the water looks very smooth. It looks a little bit strange sometimes when I show it shining. This is not in simulation mode. So as soon as we were to go into the editor and actually start simulation, you can see a little bit of waves there. It's kind of the very lowest setting for sea state. If we wanted to see a little bit more waves looking a little bit less perfect, that can be done at runtime. Okay, so now we've sort of seen a few of the different tools in Geo. Just to kind of close it out, that's kind of close to the end of the demo here. I'm just going to do, we're going to jump ahead. I've actually now have done a short mission in the city of Palma, and I've added a few more buildings in the same style as I did before. And this is just a quick demonstration of kind of a 10-minute scenario that I built showing a little bit of civilian activity and filling in some of the town detail with some parked vehicles and other things that just make it look a little bit lived in and more realistic for a training scenario. So now we're coming back into the town. We're going to come up past that little marketplace that I built. And actually, just one point while we're doing this. So I've done this all myself. We built the terrain with TerraTools initially. Then we came in with Geo and we did some editing. One of the really cool features we can do now is if you do have someone building a large scale terrain, or actually even if you don't, you can have multiple people on multiple computers doing work in Geo and then contributing together to the same database. So if, for example, if I'm the one who built the TerraTools project and then I hand it out to a number of people who can connect and create their own battle spaces, everyone can do their own little part of the town, multiple people contributing, and then TerraTools can act as a central place to kind of take all of those edits from Geo, import them back to TerraTools, and bake them into the terrain. So we have kind of multiple people contributing, and they don't have to be terrain experts to do that. If you can place a building and rotate it with your mouse, you can do terrain editing. Okay, I think that's just about it. So I think I can stop the video here.
Yep. So I'll switch back to the presentation. Hopefully you'll agree that's an extremely powerful tool there, and it's probably worth noting as well. Sorry, that's not the right button. There we go. So it's probably worth noting that everything that Earl was showing there, placing objects, those objects are obviously from our vast object library that is already part of VBS4, but you can still add your own objects as you always have been able to in VBS3. But we now have a much better pipeline for VBS4. If you want to learn about that, there is a video on our YouTube channel talking about mechs and the new object import pipeline. But as those objects are imported, if you're creating static assets, they will be available for you to use in Geo as well. So the final slide here is just a quick update on the release schedule. So in October, around the end of October, we're expecting a new patch for VBS4, which will improve some more improvements. Then we have an additional release of VBS3 in November. So that is the 21.1 release of VBS3. And again, there will be a release of VBS4 out in January of 22, and again March for VBS3 as a next release of VBS3. Again, these are subject to change. I think hopefully we have some questions, so I'm going to ask Mark to start promoting those questions for me, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. I think this one can probably go straight to Earl.
Hi, yeah. So the question is, want to find out about TerraTools and licensing. So the best way to get in contact is sales@terrasim.com or sales@bisimulations.com. We'll help you out if you contact us there.
Okay, another one for you, Earl, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, does the linear placement tool apply to bridges? So yes, it can. A lot of the bridges that are in the sort of the prefab models in VBS are just straight bridge segments. So you could definitely have those line up and you just would place them across. So I think the one thing that the linear placement tool isn't doing yet is having kind of a defined start and end elevation that could be different, or having curvature to it in the vertical space. So you might run into some trouble there, but it's actually a pretty good idea to talk to the Geo team about.
Yes, there are a bunch of training videos that are up on the customer portal. There will be more coming. So some of the tutorials I mentioned earlier on about the workflows and Bing data, for instance, are already up on YouTube generally, and there will be additional tutorials coming for VBS4 generally in the customer portal area for our current customers. Is the PhysX simulation editable? Having a SDK, can we continue developing moment models? Can we change parameters of PhysX? So currently, the underlying PhysX module itself is not exposed via the SDK, so you can't modify NVIDIA's PhysX module itself. However, all of the PhysX configuration parameters which feed into that underlying component are exposed to you as part of the model configuration. So you can change friction on wheels, for instance, side friction, the engine power, the torque, all of those parameters that you might want to configure to hopefully get to where you want to get to. Hopefully that answers your question. If you do need more detailed interaction though with the PhysX model, please contact us and we can probably get you that access and get you the parameters exposed directly through the SDK. So plan, not chalkboard anymore. Can it take data from other sources, i.e. C2 systems? So in short, yes. In long, yes, sometimes no, depending on the source. So we actually have a MSDL import, for example. That's not currently available in the release version, but we can activate it for customer requests. So if you have a use case where you need MSDL, we can turn it on for you. The reason it's not in the baseline version, MSDL as a standard is interpreted quite differently by almost everyone who uses it. So we can't broadly say that MSDL will just work because not many people actually follow the standard as listed. But yes, we can integrate with those CT systems. And if you have a particular one in mind, again, contact us and I'm sure we can get the data from that system into plan. Okay, interesting one. So at the moment, we have the differentiation between admin and user. That is the only differentiation at the moment. So as with the workflows, you have two different views of the system. As a user, you can see missions that have been promoted for you to access. So you can see the single player training missions, for instance. You can run those missions if the admin deems that you are able to run them. You are not able, though, to start your own multiplayer mission, edit your own missions, author anything on the terrain. At the moment, that is as far as we have got. We are looking into a more tiered admin privilege level system, so allowing distinct privileges for committing terrain edits, for instance, to the baseline terrain. And that's something that's coming in the near future. We have a few customers at the moment who are looking into it. So expect something from us probably towards the end of next year with a more detailed privileges level, specifically around terrain editing. Yes, so we have, so the question, sorry, I'll read out the question just for the recording. Is there any plans for the VBS World Server to simulate tides and things like waves lapping against the shore in addition to existing sea states, etc.? So yes, tides are on the roadmap. They are something that we can simulate at a high fidelity. What the issue, the complexity obviously is we have the whole planet now. So every time we increase the tide in one area, we have to simulate the tide effects beyond the battle space, and it's quite a complex task. We are working on it though, and expect to see it again in the near future. Waves lapping against the shore is more of a visual feature. The current sea states do or are affected by the underlying bathymetry, so you'll see higher waves or decreasing waves, or wave height as it gets closer into shore. But at the moment, we don't have the visual effect for the actual lapping against the shore. But again, that's something we're looking into it. I think that is it, I am being told. So thank you very much for attending. As I said, this recording will be made available on YouTube, so don't worry if you miss anything. If you do have any further questions, please email us or email sales@bisimulations.com, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, guys.